Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted to have somebody who really rarely gives interviews, at least in the roughly 15, 20 years that we have heard about him in print and otherwise, and roughly about half a decade that I've known him personally. I have not known him to give too many interviews. He has worn many hats. He was part of the APCO group at that time, helping the administration of Chief Minister Narendra Modi in the state of Gujarat. After that, Sukanti Ghosh, consultant extraordinaire, should I say, has gone on to do many roles and many, has dealt with many files, so to speak, all to do with India and South Asia. His most recent role was at ASG, where he looked at the South Asian region once again and strategies and policies to do with the South Asia region. But fundamentally, he's had a long view of not just at that time Chief Minister, now Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and his worldview, but also the relationship between his home country, India, and also his adopted country, America, and the relations between the two countries. He has worked with CEOs, large corporations, politicians, what have you. And that's why, for all of these myriad reasons, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to Global Order, and in this conversation, Sukanti Ghosh. Sukanti, welcome.
Thank you, Hindol. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for that extremely generous introduction.
I'm absolutely delighted that you've joined us. Let's take you back a little bit to around the time when you first began to, or your work first began to catch the eye of the media. You have seen then Chief Minister, now Prime Minister Modi's worldview for a long time. And indeed, you have seen his engagement with the United States of America. Take us through a little bit of your personal understanding of how the Indian Prime Minister perhaps looks at India and indeed India's relationship with specifically America.
You know, Prime Minister Modi has, even from his time in terms of, you know, being the Chief Minister of Gujarat, has been somebody who's always put, you know, the country first. And to that extent, he's believed in India, he's believed in the power of development, he's believed in the importance of people progressing. You know, and when you're looking at progressing, it's just not economic progress, it's human development, it's socioeconomic development, it is, you know, the small trader, it is the entrepreneur, it is the academic, it is the, you know, the woman on the street, it is the, you know, there are facets upon facets that we've seen him deeply concerned about and deeply focused on during our time when we were supporting him in promoting Gujarat as an ideal investment destination. We had nothing to do with the political side of things, and you know, it's a question that I've been asked many times, whether we were trying to support, you know, the political agenda. We were not. You know, our focus was purely focused on driving the economic agenda of India and driving FDI into the country. But to do that, you know, his vision has always been one which has been holistic, one which has been robust, one which has been results driven. And to that extent, you know, we felt hugely privileged, you know, to be an extension of his team in trying to build that image and trying to get global audiences to understand, you know, what he was trying to build. To come to the second part of your question in terms of, you know, the India-US relationship, I was one of those who was fortunate to be in Houston at the time when he visited, you know, the last time around. The Howdy Modi event was one that, you know, I witnessed firsthand. And to be honest, for lack of a better word, you know, the bromance that was seen between the US president and the Indian prime minister was something that you needed to see to really believe, because the entire stadium was electric, right, in terms of its feel. There was commonality in terms of spirit. There was a desire to be result-oriented, growth-oriented, and there was a very genuine sense of camaraderie between the US and India.
And that camaraderie seems to have continued into the Biden administration. Um, Tell us a little bit about your understanding of what's going on between the Modi administration and the Biden administration. Most people, of course, have noted that Prime Minister Modi is now going on a state visit, which is very different from other visits that he's been on to America. A state visit, of course, comes on the invitation of the US president, and therefore its protocol, its prestige, everything is different. And this is a rare honor. Very few, global leaders are given this honor. So this seems to be a moment of unprecedented bonhomie between India and America. There is talk about unprecedented defense technology transfer between the two countries, including in the construction of fighter jet engines and so on and so forth. Talk us through a little bit about how you see this moment.
So I think it would be, Hindol, it would be premature and slightly myopic to only look at things from the Biden administration's point of view, and the fact that, this bonhomie or the camaraderie has moved, has sort of evolved through, President Trump into President Biden. If you go back in time and you think about Ronald Reagan and you move forward from there, I think there's been a strong but growing appreciation of the importance of India, as a partner, through multiple presidents in the US. And what has been fascinating is it's been almost like a bilateral, appreciation, unlike lots of other countries that have seen, one side of the administration favor, a particular country and the other side which hasn't. As far as the US has been concerned, there has been equal, if not, admiration and appreciation on both sides of the aisle in terms of the importance of India and the importance of what, the US-India relationship can bring to the table. So, I know you've heard it a million times, but, the talk about, the world's oldest and the world's longest or the largest democracy is a bit of a catchphrase that's been used many, many times. But, there is real belief. There is a real stated understanding and belief in the commonality of the values of the two countries as far as the construction of democracy is concerned. And yes, this is a very important visit. Yes, we can see the two countries breaking new ground. We can see the Indian diaspora of the US, in the US, of which I'm a part, becoming stronger, more embedded, more central to the country and its administration. And I think there is wide-scale appreciation of what Indian talent has brought to American shores. There is equal appreciation of India's role in Asia and India's leadership role in the Indo-Pacific. So I think, this is very clearly, a watershed moment, but it isn't a watershed moment that's happened out of the blue. It's been built on, a very significant foundation that goes back several decades.
Just a little bit about the China factor in the relationship today. According to many analysts, some of the bonhomie, so to speak, or some of the closeness is driven in particular with an eye to China, at least America's eye to China, but indeed India's eye to China too. And especially the depth of defense engagement. Certainly there is a China factor at play, as America considers India its primary sort of, defense bulwark, as it were, against an advancing China in Asia. Talk us through a little bit of your understanding, but at the same time, Blinken is now in China. There seems to be a very different tone of conversation coming out from there. Take us through a little bit of your understanding of what's happening there between India, the US, and of course China.
So I think, if that's a great question, Hindol, and the fact is, if you really look at it, there is the Quad, that is increasingly, important in its centrality as far as, controlling geopolitical interests in the region. There is, obviously the Indo-Pacific and the importance of the Indo-Pacific to control the South China Sea and control Asia. There's also the I2U2. So the fact is, if you look at it, security or geopolitical interests are critical. Security interests are critical, but at the same time, economic interests are interests that are feeding into a lot of these discussions as well. So the importance of the Indo-Pacific, and you cannot have an India without, you can't have an Indo-Pacific without an India, is something that the US very clearly understands. If it really wants to look at maintaining a balance, a geopolitical balance in the region, then India is a critical player. There can be no balance without, a strong India in the region. But at the same time, there is an appreciation that, there are other factors at play, there are other forces at play that the US would like to build strong relationships with. It could be innovation with Israel and India. It could be, security around oil and hydrocarbons, and that's where, there are relationships at play. There are relationships, at play with Japan and Australia as well. So I think, is it a defining moment as far as the US is concerned? Yes. Will we see greater cooperation, economic cooperation between the two countries? Yes. Will we see greater strategic cooperation on security-related issues? Absolutely. As you said, if you go back even 10 years ago, it was unthinkable that US Air Force engines, fighter engines, bomber engines, aircraft engines would be made in any other country, definitely not in India. But then, it's equally interesting to turn around and ask, if not India, then where?
If not in India, then where? If not India, who? These are, of course, very important questions being asked today. Talk to us a little bit about what's happening in America. The Biden administration, of course, faces, electoral challenge in the next few months, as it were. So does Narendra Modi in India. Politics is getting more and more tumultuous in India, but they're getting very tumultuous in America too. What do you think will be the impact of a different administration, a non-democratic? Number one, do you think the non-democratic administration could come to power in America? Do you think that could be led by Donald Trump? And if that happens, what kind of turmoil might occur, and what impact might that have in America's relationship with India?
So I don't want to be crystal ball gazing in terms of, what could happen in terms of electoral outcomes. But I think what history has very clearly proven, again, over the last several decades, is that irrespective of who is leading the US administration, the importance of India has only got more and more central. So do I see that changing, or should we worry about that changing in any way? Frankly, no. I don't think there is any concern. India is a very clear and strong partner of choice for everything that is US focused. Part of that could be, driven by the China Plus One strategy. Part of it could be driven by, the close people to people ties that, the US administration keeps on talking about, and, Prime Minister Modi talks about whenever he's in the US. It could be based on common values, common, democratic structures. The fact of the matter is, this is a relationship that is not going away in a hurry. This is a relationship that is poised to get stronger, and will perhaps, be one of the defining axes of global order in the days to come.
And one of the pillars of this relationship, one of the emerging pillars of this relationship, or two emerging pillars really. One is energy, the other is technology. We'll take each of them one by one. First, energy. Funny things, in an ironic sort of way, funny things happened during the war between Russia and Ukraine. India was blamed for buying Russian oil. But as the Nikkei has written, I think just today, in fact, a large part of the West, including Europe, bought that oil from India. Today, the criticism about energy and India and its support to Russia, all of that seems a lot more muted. There is deepening energy cooperation between America and India. How do you see that scenario shaping up?
So I won't call it a bone of contention, right? But it's likely to be one of those areas that are hugely contested. The Biden administration has, right from its outset, been very clear about its pro-green approach. Would they want to very quickly, look at fossil fuels or supporting fossil fuels? It would mean a very significant dent in its manifesto, in its approach and its beliefs, in the importance of what is green and climate change, and so to that extent, is there the possibility of greater cooperation around everything green, around solar, around hydrogen, around the energy evolution? I think that is where one really needs to focus. There is no doubt of the importance and the centrality of hydrocarbons, and the fact that hydrocarbons will continue to be, the foundation of a lot of the energy needs, or supporting the long-term energy needs of the world. But it's a question of how quickly the world can embrace newer technologies, and move towards containing emissions and embracing newer forms of technology. Is it possible for the US and India to work around hydrogen, around carbon capture, around solar, wind, and even nuclear, perhaps? I think those are questions that are today far more central than they were in the past. Is there an opportunity to try and work together in those areas? Absolutely, because I think everybody is wanting answers and nobody really has clarity in terms of the solution. If you look at, the upcoming COP in Abu Dhabi, I think, that's a wonderful case in point, in the sense that, the gentleman who's running COP, the chair of COP, is somebody who is trying to do things around clean energy, but is being criticized the most because he is, running one of the largest corporations that are responsible for hydrocarbons in the world. If you look at what's happening in the UK with BP and Shell being called out by, the Advertising Standards Commission for potentially greenwashing, or advertising that was seen to be misleading, you have these corporates that are turning around and saying, if people don't know that we're trying to make a difference, how will they appreciate that we are making a difference? If they don't know that we are trying to offer alternatives, how will they know whether they have alternatives to embrace? I think, these are debates that will continue and are likely to become more central. Is it a place where the US and India can work together to be uh, to define not only the narrative, but to actually define a solution? Um, I think it's a very interesting place to keep your eye on. My only submission is it is quite likely in any such discussion they would need to carry Europe along with it, because the Europe is trying to take strides um, in that direction, and perhaps is going to be an equal partner, if not a more strident partner in shaping the debate about what is acceptable and what is not in the energy transition debate.
I want to also talk to you a little bit, as I said, about, energy is one part of it, other is technology. But before we move on from the energy debate, I wonder whether you could talk to us a little bit about the process of green transition. Countries like India, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi has often said, believe in a sort of equitable transition, by which they mean much more climate finance must be available via the West for developing countries so that they can use that money to effectively make this transition to their entire economies. And for a country as large as India, it really means billions of dollars that are needed to really transition India. India is actually not doing too badly in its own renewable goals, but it needs support to really push forward in this journey. Take us through a little bit about what you think seems to be a point of divergence, because often we hear American voices saying, well, India and China is where the conversation should be because they are the biggest polluters. Well, actually, per capita pollution, so to speak, remains abysmally low in India compared to the West. So there seems to be a point of divergence there. How do you think this point of divergence in the future can be bridged?
So I think, Hindol, with all due respect, I think there are some problems that are bigger than any one country, and climate is one of them. Healthcare or at least R&D in healthcare is a second. AI could be a third, right? In terms of, I know you're going to go into technology, but AI and technology is a third. Um, you know, and I think, there needs to be a mechanism by which uh, multiple countries can come to the table to work together on finding solutions around some of these. It's pointless to be pointing fingers at one country or the other because there are always, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? And there's always ways to explain how something is critical to a particular country. It depends on, the way fuel is consumed. It depends on, per capita consumption, per capita emissions. The fact of the matter is one needs to step back from finger pointing and trying to look at the problems. One needs to work together to try and find solutions. And some of those solutions will only come out of countries working together. And and I think the ones that you're talking about very clearly uh, fall in that realm. So again, it's not only a question of coming together and citing all the problems, it's a question of finding solutions.
Talk a little bit about technology. In technology, there are many, sites of convergence, so to speak. One, of course, is the democratic use of technology, something that India prides itself in. The India stack, you have Aadhaar on one side, digitization of health records on the other. There's the digital stack, the Aadhaar stack, and so on and so forth. The other, of course, is the intervention of AI and how AI is really dramatically going to change things. Do you think, or what are the two or three major areas in AI and in the democratization of technology where India and the US can effectively become partners and show the path to the rest of the world?
I think, the democratization of technology, as you call it in India, has definitely been one of the success stories of what India's been able to achieve over the last decade. there were doubts raised over a lot of these initiatives at one point in time. They have been not only, uh, pushed through, they have proven to be successful. They've been proven to be models that can be exported to other countries. And there are lots of other countries that are lining up at India's door, wanting to learn from India, wanting to embrace, these models and take them into, their own countries. And there is, there is not enough that can be said, about how these solutions are making a difference or could continue to make a difference to people, to hundreds of millions of people around the world. And I think that is a model where India has succeeded. India's set a very high benchmark, and is continuing to socialize or democratize a lot of those solutions. The other piece that you're talking about is the AI piece, and as I shared, I don't think I'm suitably qualified to talk to you about the AI piece. That being said, I have in the recent months sat in on a number of closed door roundtables on the power of AI, the use of AI in various industries, and what's likely to be happening in those industries. And I think the one thing that strikes me every time I sit into these meetings is that there is no common language. There is no common understanding. There is no common, it's very easy to paint specters about, what's going to happen or what could happen. The fact is, I think AI is going to make a very significant difference to not only both, India and the US, but to the world at large. But it's going to make a difference, much like, any very significant, tectonic shift in technology has made. If you remember, the Y2K piece, where the entire world was wrapped up in spasms, with apocalyptic visions running, aplenty. Ultimately, there was precious little that happened. In the case of AI, I think, yes, there is a tectonic shift in the offing. To use that tectonic shift to our benefit is something that global leaders will need to work towards and work, in partnership and in close conjunction to define, what is it and where is it that we want to use, this technology. But that being said, without a common understanding, there will always be, I wouldn't want to say rogue elements, but there will always be misunderstandings of the technology, of what difference it can make and the dangers that it portends.
Y2K was a defining moment for India because that's when India's great back office boom began. And today we are seeing and saying that that wasn't really a back office boom. That was only one part of the back office boom. And very low end services were outsourced. That was more of an offshoring or outsourcing boom, but not really a back office boom. But what we are now probably going to see, and that's the assessment, is a real back office boom, where a lot of far more complicated back office processes are shifting to India, are being sent to India. One of the examples of that is the number of GCCs that have come up from a large number of tech companies now based in India. And India is a global hub now of GCCs, with major companies expanding their GCC network in India. Tell us a little bit about what that changes for India as an investment destination, as an economic, hub, so to speak.
So let me sort of approach this slightly differently, and that is from a decoupling, a globalization versus decoupling, approach. And I think if one of the things, if one of the the strongest, I won't call it results, but one of the strongest influences, or one of the strongest changes that came about as a result of COVID, right, was the fact that everybody started to look inward. Everybody started to look at their own people. Everybody started to look at their own economies. Everybody started to eschew, the parameters of what was considered to be global markets, because everyone was looking out for themselves. But at the same time, there was a very clear movement towards nearshoring. But at the same time, there was a very clear movement towards identifying your friends and working with them. So along with the decoupling, there was a strengthening of certain bonds and certain relationships of people that you could rely on countries you could rely on identifying who your friends were and working more with them. I think, India's in a very interesting position in that space. On one hand, it has chosen to stay independent in certain areas, and, energy being one of them. But in the other case, it has actually deepened its relationships with many countries around the world. And technology is a fascinating case in point. Again, to be honest, I think if you look at some of the problems that we are likely to be dealing with as a global economy in the next 50 years, a number of those problems cannot be solved by one country alone. They will have to be solved by countries working together. And in many cases, there will be countries that are leading the charge and defining not only, the narrative. Again, I'm continuously saying this. This is not a question of defining the narrative. It's a question of defining the solutions. And there is a very significant difference between the two. And, technology is one area where, India and the US could definitely, help start defining, a lot of the solutions that are needed, for the global order.
Let's talk a little bit about the phrase you used, friendshoring. Now, friendshoring becomes particularly important in light the China question. Many of the companies who now look at this idea of friendshoring, which was propagated, an idea that was propagated by America after COVID, essentially want to move their supply chains to India, or at least to a quote-unquote safer shore. Now, according to many experts, India provides a safe shore, not only because it is a democratic country, its processes are more democratic and more transparent. It's not run by authoritarian government, but importantly, also it has a vast domestic market in which goods and services can be sold. Tell us a little bit about, how India is seen through the light of friendshoring sitting in America today, vis-a-vis China.
So I think, if you look at, and again, I'm going to pass the difference between friendshoring and, the China Plus One strategies. I think if you look at the China Plus One strategy of not only India, but of a lot of Southeast Asian countries, I think it's important to go back and see what exactly happened. And yes, if you really look at it, there were several countries across Southeast Asia that have benefited from the so-called breakdown in the relationship between the US and China, or the specter of the breakdown of the relationship between the US and China. And I would be inaccurate to say that India was the preferred destination for all. And I think even that assumption is incorrect. Yes, the government has come out with a lot of progressive, schemes. It I'm talking about the PLI schemes. It did rationalize its corporate income taxes. It did try significantly to ease, issues around doing business in the country. And it has definitely, proven that it has a stable government with a purpose of reducing, red tape in the country. That being said, and it's very clearly, built on not only progressive policies and stability of government, but also on the quality of human talent and the abundance of human talent that India has. But that being said, there is a significant amount of economic trade that has moved out of China and into other, Asia Pacific countries and Southeast Asian countries. And those countries have perhaps, done equally well, in attracting businesses to their shores for a variety of reasons. It's a question of, once the floodgates have been opened and, businesses have moved, how are these countries trying to look at building competitive advantages between themselves over the longer term? And that's a piece that that requires much more than what has happened already.
What are the competitive advantages that India ought to build in the coming 5 years, 5 to 10 years, in order to really attract more and more investment from America, but not just America, also from other parts of the world, in order to ensure that it not only matches 7% odd growth rate that it says it will achieve, but actually goes to 8 to 9%, which will enable it to meet that target of getting to $5 trillion by 2030.
So let me talk about one particular sector that's very close to my heart, and let me talk about where perhaps there is a clash between commercial and national interest, and there is perhaps an opportunity for both sides to do more, and that's healthcare, right? And pharmaceuticals. In the last decade, a number of large global corporations have decided to slow the launch of cutting-edge innovative products into India. And that's primarily because of price caps. That's primarily because of different, mechanisms, or the availability of mechanisms, the propagation of insurance as a payer, in India vis-a-vis, other countries in the West. From a national interest point of view, the government of India and the government of India's views can be rationalized very, very clearly, because it's trying to ensure that costs are kept under control, which is even now a very significant debate in the US, the cost of pharmaceuticals, the access to pharmaceuticals to the common man. But at the same time, if you really look at the latest drugs, cutting edge drugs, there is the unfortunate situation where the people of India are not perhaps getting access to the latest and the best, pharmaceutical products and drugs in the world, and that is a worrying situation. I think there needs to be a way by which the global order approaches common interest versus commercial interest. Healthcare is something that is almost at the intersection between the two. You can sit as an advocate for global health and say, there should be greater health equity, there should be greater access to the quality drugs and quality healthcare, and it's got to be affordable to all. But at the same time, there there must be access to the best and the latest treatments and biotech treatments, medical devices, pharmaceutical drugs that are made affordable and accessible to people at large. Is there an opportunity for the global order, for India and the US to work together on this, on innovation, on R&D, on access to medicines, on looking at pricing? I'm sure there is. I don't think any country would want to eschew, um, the latest quality drugs or avoid its people having access to those drugs. But yes, it's got to happen at costs which are relatively more affordable than they currently are. So the only way things can really work out is if uh, there is kind of a support mechanism that allows companies to draw on global funds to look at R&D and look at access to care. We were talking about technology. I think one of India's biggest success stories in the last 5 years, very clearly, has been the way India literally became, the vaccine hub of the world during COVID. Um, is there a lot to be proud of in that? Yes. Is there a lot to be concerned about in that? Yes. Because all said and done, we're talking about a huge concentration risk, and that's how the world outside sees it. There is growing deference and admiration of India's ability to be the vaccine factory of the world, but there is concern at the same time. And I think, preemptive steps need to be taken between the two countries to try and ensure that, we are better prepared. And at the same time, any concerns around concentration risk, which could result in a knee-jerk reaction, are avoided.
As we come to the end of our conversation, I have one or two last questions, Sukanti. One of them is, when you look at the Indian diaspora in America, a group of people you are part of too, this is a bunch of people who are now widely considered, if I were to, take the phraseology of that wonderful new book, well, not that new, but recent book, they are the other 1%, right? This is a community which is now the wealthiest, most educated, and most upwardly mobile, and many would say best integrated. How do you see the evolving role? And now that Prime Minister Modi is going to America on a state visit, there is conversation once again on how diaspora plays a big role in the reception that Indian leaders get around the world, especially Prime Minister Modi gets, and also the influence that diaspora, especially in countries like America and the UK and increasingly Australia, have on the policies of that country. How do you see the role of the American diaspora, the Indian American diaspora today, and what do you see its role, or how do you see its role in the years to come?
Hindol, great question. And again, I'm going to answer it slightly tangentially, as I shared with you at the top of the call. I'm currently in London. And if you, even if you were to disregard, all the jokes around Teen Murti Bhavan that, both you and I have heard over the years, the fact of the matter is, the US is, well, the UK is a great example of a country which today has a very significant South Asian diaspora that is making its presence felt at all levels of industry and government. The same is the case, if not more, in the US, where if you really look at it, there are an increasing number of not only corporate leaders and entrepreneurs and lawmakers and administrators and judicial heads, and teachers, and go across doctors, go across professions, go across industries. You do have people of South Asian origin, who have risen to the senior-most levels of public life and private life. And I think, there is an appreciation very clearly that these people, as in we, are not troublemakers. We are builders. We are positive thinkers. We are people who are there to shape and build, organizations and entities and countries together. I think the Indian diaspora has played a very significant role in shaping the thinking and public perceptions around India, and that could start with Silicon Valley, or with Indian doctors around the world, or Indian sportsmen around the world. The fact of the matter is, yes, receptions to the government of India have been, I won't say mirrored, or a reflection of what the government, what the Indian diaspora has been able to do. I think it's the other way around at the same time. I think the diaspora takes pride in the fact that there is visionary leadership in the country, and there is, a country that they can be proud of. I'm yet to meet, I've met a lot of people of the diaspora who consider themselves to be American and consider themselves to be British, but all of them do say that they are of Indian origin, and they're proud to be of their Indian origin and Indian heritage. So I think, the two, go hand in hand. And, I think I won't say it's reflected glory, but I think, there is appreciation of the importance of this community and of India and of this relationship and where it can lead.
What kind of impact do you see the diaspora community have on foreign policies and engagements between India and in other countries, in this case, America, in the years to come?
I'd say considerable, as I shared, all said and done. I cited, the UK example, but, obviously we've got Vice President Kamala Harris. We've got, quite a few people in the administration. We've got a very strong set of administrators on both sides of the aisle, right? Who hold India and who are very proud to be friends of India. And, I think going forward, this is likely to deepen quite considerably. I'm thinking about the last 30 years of my career and the number of successful Indians or members of the diaspora in India 30 years ago, in public life in America, and the number who are there today. The numbers have risen, in leaps and bounds. This number is only going to increase much further. And what is happening with greater levels of integration, any possible gaps in understanding and appreciation are likely to reduce. So I think there's likely to be greater levels of alignment. I'm not saying that Americans of Indian origin will put India first. They will definitely put America first, much like, members of the diaspora in the UK will put the UK first. But the fact is, I think there will be greater harmonization and greater appreciation of the different cultures and what the countries can do together.
That wonderful note, Sukanti Ghosh. Thanks very much for taking all this time out and talking to us, even as Prime Minister Modi heads to America for a great grand state visit, a rare honor, but also a moment of great celebration and renewed bonhomie between two great democracies. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Hindol. Thank you very much for this opportunity.